The future is no longer what it has been in the last 60 years. And therefore, the parliamentary system that has served us well, do we not need to review?
Right.
Do we need not to have discussion? We are very good with coming up with something that's uniquely Singapore, just like the NMP scheme, just like the NCMP, just like the GRC. Because I saw that even with opposition parties in a majoritarian democracy, they will still stay in majority interests and dominant narratives.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey, Anthea.
Hey, Jeremy.
Good to have you back on the show. The last time I had you on the show was back in the pandemic. It was an audio-only recording. Yeah.
We just started this podcast, right?
So time flies. We were just discussing now I have 2 kids. So a big change as well.
The world has also changed.
Yeah, and the world has changed a lot. I mean, a pandemic, a global trade war, and then obviously new elections.
It's literally 5 years because if it was like 2020 and earlier you were saying it's April, right? So
Effectively.
wow, 5 years.
I know.
Yeah,
Yeah. And now at least we get to upgrade to a video conversation.
That's right.
And just talk because, I think it's always been fascinating because I always known you from the social entrepreneurship space. And then you became a nominated member of parliament.
I did.
And then you went through that whole experience during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then now you're obviously building out new initiatives on leadership. But also you continue to be a really great writer on the Singapore electoral scene.
Thank you.
And so very much as we kind of knew that Singapore elections are coming up. So it's a good time to do a refresher. Also talk about the future as well.
Catch up, right?
Yeah.
For the last 5 years. And the last time we saw each other was still online.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So please introduce yourself.
As I was saying to you, Jeremy, I just find that really hard. Maybe because I've been around the block a little bit, trying to just describe myself. I would just say that people who introduce me, whether event organizers or when I write commentaries, they will call me, first and foremost, they tend to identify me as a former nominated member of parliament, but also a social entrepreneur, which I certainly understand, given the sort of different initiatives, as you said, social enterprises, community projects, that I'm very fortunate to be able to sort of start or co-found. And then author, because I published 2 books.
Yeah.
And the third it's in progress.
Right.
And what else do they call me? I'm coach because I also, do coaching. Speaker.
Yeah.
Public speaking, do a lot of public speaking.
Yeah.
So because of that, sometimes people will say, hey, but what's your full-time job? I always want to know, like, what's your full-time job?
Last time you were a banker.
It's much easier to say, right? Like, just say, what do you do?
I belong to this company.
We, in a time of the world where, we are also multidimensional in our interests, in our engagement. It's really hard, I mean, maybe a full-time job, the majority of us still have. I don't. So I say I'm a full-time human being and part-time doing everything else.
Sweet. Full-time human being. That's a good Twitter biography,
Actually, Malcolm Gladwell did a challenge many years ago for people to come up with a 7-word biography. So in 7 words, I cheated lah. So full-time, I hyphenated it as one word, and part-time also hyphenated as one word. But I thought it kind of really described me that, I really want to never forget that I'm first a human before I'm anything else. And that also informs a lot of the work I do, the ideas I have, the things that I spend and give time to, right? And therefore also how I show up in my relationships, right? So that's kind of foregrounding who I am. And then, I really part-time doing everything else, like curious, start this, start that. And you would definitely resonate with the second part of part-time everything else as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I know for sure. And so, obviously, check out the previous episode to talk about your past, your history as a banker, and how you decided to move in the social impact space. People just got very curious, and the reason why was to double click into like your experience as a nominated member of parliament, right? And obviously at that time it was still like, fresh and everything. But now I think obviously there's a bit more space to decompress and reflect. So I got to go back into like the start of that NMP
Sure.
journey, which is how in the world do you even become a nominated member of parliament? Like, you get like a letter from an owl that flies into your window. There's a nice little, wax seal that says,
You have been chosen.
to the nominated member of parliament. How does that conversation even start?
I was first asked to consider being an NMP in 2011, just after the watershed election,
Right. Yeah.
where I think for the first time, PAP lost the alternate GRC. And so I was asked, then I was still in the corporate sector, and I said no, although at that time I knew, but I had already been very involved in the social sector, whether it was as a volunteer, sort of, rolling up my sleeves, or on the board. I think at the time I was still on the board of UN Women, what's called UN Women here in Singapore, and some of the other organizations like Wings, and all of that. And so I was asked, I said no, because I knew I was giving myself another 2 years in the corporate sector, and I will quit the corporate sector to actually go into volunteerism, social entrepreneurship, full time. So I said, no lah, I'm going to make change on the ground. Politics is not for me. I just think that the change that I can make will be on the ground and all of that. And then 2018, I was asked again.
Yeah.
And so 7 years had passed since my first invitation. Why did I say yes? I realized that there was structural change that needed to be made for real change to happen, right? Because on the ground, a lot of great stuff are happening. But you hit the wall sometimes. And in my case, it was not just mental health is a big part of it. As you know, I had my own personal brush with depression 20 years ago. So mental health has been something that I've been really championing to make a lot of changes within the system of healthcare, but also across a lot of policies, in education, in workplace, and all of that. But also just generally looking at certain marginalized communities and vulnerable communities and all that. So then I realized actually you can do a lot of work, but if the policies don't change, then you will still hit a wall. And so I said yes. I said yes only to the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre wanting to nominate me as a potential candidate. But obviously I thought, I will just say yes. But this, you don't know, because the selection process is such that, you have 6 functional sectors. My time, there were 48 applications, and in our constitution, there are only 9 NMPs in parliament. So, Jeremy, you don't know how you're going to actually end up being selected. I got to the last round of the in-person interview with the Special Select Committee, and then I actually thought there's no way they would choose me because I did so poorly in the questions they asked.
Wait, how would you do poorly questions? Are they asking you like an IQ question, like, how many golf balls?
Legislation and all of that. And I thought I did do enough homework to understand the process of parliament. You must remember by then, I was 50 years old, right? I've been in C-suite, I've been running teams, and I've done a lot of interviews based on a very informed basis that I've done interviews of other people. I really thought I did poorly, but I was selected.
Why do you think you were selected?
So up to that point, I clearly had gotten quite a bit of attention with the work that I was doing in the social entrepreneurship scene. I started the social enterprise Chiba, bringing together the work integration model, which is usually the model of social enterprises, hiring and empowering people who are deaf and hard of hearing to lead silent T experiences in workplaces and schools, really promoting mental health, well-being, and also empathy. And then the hearing team were also people who were people in recovery from mental health conditions. So it was seen as really quite disruptive, because I think up to that point, social enterprises, I suspect we might still be the only one where the entire team was made up of, people with different abilities and different needs, right? But yet we actually designed the entire social enterprise around really truly empowering them. It wasn't just to hire them. It was to really empower them to be standing in front, because it's a silent experience. Nobody needs to talk. In fact, they become the abled ones, and the participants become the disabled ones, right? And so it was challenging a lot of the notion of disability and all of that. So I think that could be part of why they saw that, there was a very sort of disruptive way of thinking about disability, social enterprises, and all that. I think the other was obviously my leadership experience, right? Being a C-suite, up to then probably about 25 years of C-suite experience, and even in the involvement in the social sector, being the president of Wings, I helped to found Daughters of Tomorrow, and was on the board of different charities and also national committees. I was also on the committee of the social sector innovation panel. But in my application form, fun fact, when asked, what would you say you bring to Parliament as an NMP that's unique? And I actually said that I'm a divorcee. I still live in a 3-room HDB flat. And I'm unencumbered in the sense that I'm not actually working for anybody, and therefore I don't have to worry whether it's going to affect my business, or if I'm still sort of teaching, I will worry about whether I'm within a university I shouldn't say this or that, right? And so the three things I said, I thought I'll be bringing quite unique perspectives and also represent sort of different thinking, that I've been a leader, but I'm also in the HEB estate.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and frankly, knowing you from the social sector, you were like kind of like one level above, so you're not like two in one, if that makes sense.
No.
I think you are a good, like, I don't know, arbiter, like kind of like, mutual representative of the whole social sector. So I totally see it from a representation perspective.
Right. And so definitely. And I think also talking about this, thank you for saying that, because actually it's so important to me. I mean, of course, mental health cuts across all segments and all population communities. But people, always kind of wonder, like, oh, what do you stand for? Because you're so involved in different things.
Cats, dogs, and
elderly disability and mental health and, sustainability, because I'm very involved with climate change and the green sector. And all of that, migrant workers, as you know, very big part of it, right? I'm very involved in that. But I go back to the full-time human, right? I mean, these are very sort of human-centered issues. But I also want to say that part of it is, I don't know whether you agree with me, and maybe you do, I've always known myself to be a bit more of a horizontal than a specialist. And it actually pans out in the way my career has gone. Like I was very quickly more identified as a leader than some specialists within a certain department. But also that may have come from this tendency of being able to see systems. So I see systems. And maybe that's why being horizontal, I can see how all this connect. And the other thing is also, I mean, realistically, who lives a single issue life? If you come from being a human, I mean, no one lives a single issue life, right? So if you go the other way around and think about humans and being person-centered, and even myself, I just use myself as an example. I mean, geez, it just has been so multidimensional, it's just so cross-cutting. So I guess that's probably also another reason, maybe, that they saw how I was involved in so many different things. I mean, to your point about the representation, I guess.
So what was your first day of being a nominated member of parliament? So how did they inform you that you passed? Is it like an email?
That's a really good question. Actually, I remember it happening on a Monday. And the reason I remember, because every Monday, we do a half-day digital detox in the morning. So I don't read my phone, I don't read my emails. And then I came on at noon. Usually I come online after 12. And then I saw quite a few emails, but also some messages on WhatsApp. And the reason is because the Parliament was going to make the announcement to media at 3, and they've been trying to get hold of me whole morning to see I've been selected. That's why I will not forget it, even though it's such a while back. Because it just happened to be on a Monday, which means I wasn't actually online. And then when I came online, I saw all of this, didn't recognize the number, but saw the message. And then apparently it was going to go out to the public in terms of the press release, the media release that afternoon at 3 or 4 or something. And so really, I only knew it for like, an hour or so, and then it was like all over the news essentially, because of when I came back online. And which then got me, like, because they then told us that, oh, media will be in touch and you're going to be asked, how do you feel? And this is all happening within a couple of hours. And because I didn't have a day like maybe the rest, because they might have already received it much earlier than what they did, obviously. So then I had to sort of organize my thoughts around what I'm going to say. The good thing is that the application, they asked you already some of those questions. So it's more of just sort of bring that back up by articulating it more succinctly. Because, like application like you go to university, long essay so you have to sort of, articulate it, distill it. So I did all of that just in time for the first media interview.
And what was it like? Because even when I knew you at that time, obviously you were quite comfortable with media and you were speaking on various events and ceremonies. Yeah. Obviously, I think it must be a bit different when you become a nominated member of parliament. The type of questions are different. Yeah.
I mean, that's true. But I think I also felt very fortunate that because of the corporate experience where, I had gone through things like media training, because I was C-suite, right? I'm a CEO, I was managing director. So then because I was the spokesperson, and all that. So I got those training, which came in handy for sure. And also understanding, what to say and not to say in terms of like how do you bridge, how do you, have key messages when you're being interviewed. All that came through for me. Helps that also I enjoy sort of writing and comms and all that. So that's been helpful. But still, it's very different because I'm going into a role that up to that point, there wasn't anything to tell you what a nominated member of parliament is other than, what is written in constitution and what is on the parliament website, which is also very sort of like very official. It doesn't tell you the experience. It tells you what it is, but it doesn't tell you the experience. It also is a big reason why I ended up, after I stepped down, putting that book together.
Yeah, what's the book called?
The Nominated Member of Parliament Scheme, are unelected voices still necessary in Parliament? And so that was published in September 2022, 2 years after I stepped down. And that was really to capture experiences, right? Not sort of like academic papers or commentary, but actually experiences of the individual NMP. So it's made up of essays of 20 NMPs, and there's at least one NMP of every parliament session up to that point, which was 8 parliament sessions. Since we had the NMP scheme, which was introduced in 1990, right? And so, because of that, there was a bit of the apprehension. You don't know what is the role that you just got appointed for, which you thought you will never get, right? And it all happened within a couple of hours. That first day in Parliament, well, first we have a appointment ceremony because we are in an appointed role. So we had an appointment ceremony with the president, then was President Halima. And then our first sitting was maybe 2 weeks after, I think. And that first sitting would always be a swearing-in ceremony of the NMPs. So that was that. We were not expected necessarily to participate. It was too late anyway because there's a sort of a cut-off time for expressing your intent to either speak for the bill or to file your questions. So the first day of NMP was quite chill because you're just kind of swearing in, then you kind of know where you will be sitting, which is all very interesting. It's like, starting a new role, going to a new space, meeting all the NMPs for the first time. But before that, we did also have lunch with the speaker then. That was the only time we had a bit of orientation from him. Again, not from NMPs. So it's from sort of the speaker telling us that in the onboarding, in the orientation, we actually also asked former NMPs to come share a bit of their experience. Which is what I did actually. I actually then, together with other NMPs, we then organized a lunch for the latest batch. We asked for lunch, and then they came, and then a few of us came, and then so that they can ask us questions. And all that.
Exactly. And so, what was that first day like? Orientation, swearing in, so forth. But
I spoke.
Well, it's interesting because it's the first day you walk into the parliament as the responsible person. In my head, I don't know, does it feel like, the first day of school, like where do you sit, who's friendly, who doesn't like you?
So all of the sentiments of, the first day of school or the first day of work. I definitely felt all of that.
Right.
Which means it's actually a mixed bag of excitement, maybe even acceleration, right? Because for me, that was the first time in chamber, and then you're going to be told where you're sitting, who you're going to be sitting with, but also apprehension. Like, wow, you go in, this is the August chamber, and, it can be a little bit sort of like, wow, it's got this sense of grandeur. It is the highest hall of the land. So it's very similar to that, a mixed bag. So you're holding equal part of exhilaration, excitement, as well as apprehension, and also imposter syndrome. Especially for me, I just thought they would not select me because I thought I did poorly in the interview, right? And so I thought, oh, wow, am I going to be able to do this and all that? But at the same time thinking, wow, that's so exciting. I can talk about mental health now and all that. The reason why I said yes was to say, hey, I need to bring up all of these things that I found, whether for women, for people from the disability community, for mental health, that now I can actually, so it's just like such a mixed bag, but it's so amazing.
And I think it was interesting because you differentiated between the first day versus the first time speaking.
Yes, different.
And I think, me and other people, like, I still sometimes have a fear of public speaking, Obviously, I practice public speaker as well. But always before that, I always have to center myself, do the breath work. And I can't even imagine doing that in Parliament. That's so scary.
It's like completely filled. And that first day I spoke, in front of me was the cabinet, right? And I understand there's a little bit of that practice, that the first time you speak, especially whether it's as the NMP or maybe as an MP, I don't know, but I was told that the first time you speak, by and large, the cabinet, the front benchers want to be there to lend you moral support, which I thought was really nice. And it's true, but it's also, in other words, it exacerbates your nerves.
Everyone's looking at me.
Because literally, when I stood up and where I was sitting, when I go to the rostrum, I'm literally facing the Prime Minister, was flanked by his senior minister, Teo Chee Hean and Tharman. And the other ministers, and because of the way you speak, you go straight up to the rostrum in front of them, right? So that was that. And also, I chose my first bill to speak on, the Employment Amendment Bill, and this was in November 2018, and I knew I wanted to talk about mental health, right? And I clearly remember that I wanted to raise the issue of how it is still asking for mental health history of a job applicant. It's such an archaic practice. But secondly, it also, it entrenches the stigma of mental health at the workplace.
Right.
And it's therefore very discriminatory as a practice. So I remember talking about that. But before that, I was a ball of nerves because I knew, as I was preparing for the speech, you talk about centering. I knew I was going to center, but I thought, why am I not introducing, given how much of a yogi, and by then I still am, I'm a very dedicated meditation practitioner. It changed my life, right, of what I've gone through, and I know how important it is to be present as leaders, and where would it be more important to be present than the chamber, right? Because everything we do in that chamber affect everyone in Singapore. So I actually started my first speech asking for permission from the entire house and chamber to take 3 deep breaths with me. Only 3
deep breaths. Okay, there we go.
And I also, basically it was a mindful breathing practice. But I must say, I was a ball of nerves knowing that I was kind of, doing something that's not quite by the standing order of how you speak and what you do. So I did ask for permission from the speaker, asking for his indulgence, asking for this, and actually saying why I think it's important. Because I firmly believe that as leaders and what we do here, bring that attention, having that presence is so important. And I was so proud of it. Apparently I was the first one who ever did that in Parliament.
I remember that actually.
In the history. Oh.
Because he came out and he did that, and everyone was like, a lot of people were like, what a weirdo.
I know. So I was absolutely a weirdo, but I can tell you, as a personal experience, I cannot tell you how moved and how powerful and how compelling it was. For a chamber, for a place where it's all about debating, it's all about speaking, it's all about having attention, challenging, just words and words and words. And for that 3 seconds, all you heard was silence and breathing. I just thought that was so powerful, And I must say that after my speech, The whole time, the Prime Minister, the two, I remember, were just smiling at me. You know, first the breathing, and I asked them all to close their eyes. And when they open their eyes, I thank them, their confidence and their trust and for their indulgence. And I saw the smile of the senior ministers and the Prime Minister. And then after I finished the speech, they all gave me the thumbs on the armrest.
And so let's talk about, for sure, that's probably a beautiful memory.
Yes.
And I'm kind of curious because, you mentioned that the chamber is also really for debate, for speaking up, right? Or part of it is like, what's the point? You know what I mean by that is like, a lot of people feel like, hey, if you speak up, it's worthless because decisions are made.
Because it's a super
policy.
majority.
So what's the value of you speaking up, right? Like, sure, employers will ask about mental history. Boo.
No,
should not do that.
True.
But so let's talk about that. Like, what is the
value of debate? No, it's a great question, and it's very important, especially the time that we're in now, where elections coming, right? And voters and citizens may ask that question, and if they're not, I hope this discussion will make them think more deeply about who are you choosing? Because they're called members of parliament because they have a role to play in parliament. And so, what is parliament, right? Parliament is really doing three things. It is actually doing lawmaking, right? This is where laws are made. And to your point earlier, what is the point? Because it's a supermajority parliament. All bills that are tabled will be passed, right? So then what's the point of debating? And I'll come to that. But the second function of parliament is actually holding the government to account. And it's literally written on the parliament website. Critical inquiry, right? Holding government to account of policies and actions is what Parliament's supposed to do. That's why there is the parliamentary questions and all that. That's the process to let MPs do that. The bills will be where we are doing lawmaking, and then the parliamentary questions are for us to hold the government to account by asking questions. And the third is financial scrutiny, the financial oversight, which is budget and COS. So actually you're choosing members of parliament to be able to do all three things. So coming back to your question, what's the point of that if it's super... Now, in lawmaking, it's very important that we make sure, even though every bill will be passed, by actually contributing to your views and perspective, particularly bring the voices of your constituents to the House in debating on a certain bill, you are actually making sure the bill in implementation, the bill can be the law, but the way it's implemented is still being worked out after the bill has been passed as law. So by contributing to it, you're making sure the implementation is equitable, is effective, and still, so it's not lost. Right. Of course, in a non-supermajority parliament, laws may not get passed.
Correct.
But in our case, there's still value because can still be tweaked, adapted, becoming more inclusive, and you can still contribute to policymakers in implementing those bills and laws, more effectively, right, by contributing to it. At the same time, every bill gives MPs the opportunity to raise issues related to the bill, but also to highlight issues for the media, for the people to think about. So what do I mean by that? Every bill, I'm not going to change the employment bill that I spoke up on. I won't. But interestingly, actually, 2-3 years later, there was actually a change to the policy asking for mental health history deemed a discriminatory practice.
Right.
So it can, but it won't happen immediately. So what are you speaking to? Actually, when MPs speak up, you're speaking to the people and the media. So you use every bill as an opportunity to do that, to raise issues of national interest, but representing the voices of the people you represent. So there's still value for sure. On top of that, every speech made is in Hansard. So it is very important as part of our parliamentary history, our political history, but also for future parliamentary references, right? That this has been discussed and yet the government of the day said this or did not do, So there's still that value there. Holding the government to account, very important. Parliamentary questions should not be treated as just like, asking questions. Especially important because we don't have Freedom of Information Act in Singapore, right? So it's very important asking for information so that information is given, data is given, that actually helps the social sector, for the social service agencies to know this information to better plan services. You know, for you to know some of this data and all that in terms of the segments of population and the income and all of that, for you to also plan your business more effectively. You need to challenge the government if there are certain issues in governance, certain issues in equity, whether it's with opposition or with communities and minority groups that are being left out. You need to challenge that. And I think Albert Moo mentioned this, right? That a democracy, it's not about making good laws, but to make sure we stop bad laws. It's only in democracy that you can have different voices. So different voices will bring up things that tell you that, hey, this group has been completely left out or ignored. And then, the budget is the budget. But budget for NMP, we don't get to vote.
Yeah.
We don't vote because we don't have the people's mandate. But we can challenge the bill, we can debate on bill, we can ask parliamentary questions. We can also vote on the bill if there's a call for that. But like I said, it's a supermajority, so...
Yeah, gotcha. And so there's, interesting because you're starting to talk a little bit about the elections, but also I think talking about the benefits of NMP scheme, which is the functional representation and the voicing our bills. But also there's criticism of the scheme, right?
Yes.
So I think the Workers' Party said that it's like duckweed, right? Because these members of parliament don't have a connection to actual voters on the ground. I think, what are the other criticisms you've heard?
I think Tan Chee was against this. In fact, he actually defied the party whip when the bill was tabled in 1990 and actually voted against the NMP scheme. If you read the Hansard for that particular debate for the NMP bill, it's fascinating, it's riveting actually for me. And I did a lot of research on that when I was doing the book, right? And basically a lot of backbenchers from the PAP side were very against it, and they make very good arguments against it. And some of them even said, like, you're starting this NMP scheme when, if you listen to us backbenchers, then we're already providing all the alternative voices, but you're not actually listening to us, which is really interesting to see. Basically own self, fighting with own self in that sense, right? But really a very good debate that went on. And Tan Chee talked about how MPs that come through the back door because they're not coming through, being on the ground and with the residents and not being obviously having the mandate of the people. And also that they were bringing their hobby horses, to Parliament and not actually looking at sort of the overall welfare of the constituents and all of that. And so you're right, and also actually as we're speaking, we are also hot on the heels of just the latest, the recent controversy of the two NMPs resigning before their term finish. So NMP already as a scheme has its fair share of criticism, being undemocratic, the selection process being clearly skewed towards the incumbent party because the Special Select Committee is formed in proportion to the representation, and therefore, obviously, the Special Committee is a majority made up of PAP representatives. And for my time, it was just one. So Sylvia was the representative from the Workers' Party, then was Workers' Party only during my time as opposition. And the rest were from ministers, but also MPs from the incumbent party. But I think now with the two NMPs resigning, I think it has really dragged the scheme through the mud, in my view. And so I've been actually very openly upset and also very vocal about what this latest occurrence has done to the scheme that was already shaky, already needed so much more strengthening. I think there's still a lot of merits to the scheme, and I'll come to that, but the latest two NMPs resigning before they finish the term, and they both have said that, one of them has been already announced as a candidate for one of the GRCs, but the other openly said he stepped down to join the party, but he has just recently said he won't be running this time round due to the public feedback, right? Why is it bad? It just means that how could they have, still serve their role as a parliamentarian one day and the next day they quit to join the party? It just, calls the question that that they may have not been non-partisan, right? Because you don't just turn non-partisan overnight. And there had to be also a discussion and a dialogue before they were comfortable enough to say, I'm going to quit this midterm because I'm going to join this party. So what it basically makes an NMP scheme become is that it's a talent pipeline for political parties. Then how is that serving the people? It is a constitutionally enshrined public institution to serve Singapore in a way where 9 members of parliament are appointed by the president of the country to represent Singaporeans at large in issues that are overarching with the national interest of Singapore. And if they want to join political parties, let them finish the term, right? And so that it allows for the scheme to stay in integrity, but also for this scheme not to be seen as a talent pipeline while the NMPs are still fulfilling their non-partisan duties for Singaporeans.
Right. So it sounds like two issues that you're talking about separate. One is about the non-party nature of the NMP scheme versus running for office as
a political candidate.
And I think you're saying that should have more space in between at minimum, right? And then obviously the other part that you're also talking about a little bit is whether the scheme should be seen as a talent pool
for all political parties.
Yeah.
But I feel like if this is a public institution, you want to keep it in integrity as the institutionalized block of independence in parliament. And that also explains why to date there haven't been any, maybe save for one who ran as an independent, right? But you have not seen any NMP join a political party. Even if there was a cooling off period, none of them had joined any of the political parties. That's actually less of an issue. To have the NMP scheme become a talent pipeline for political parties, I think we need to talk about that as a country. Is that what we want? And if it is, then say it out loud. This actually has become that. Then we need to take it out of the constitution, make it an act of parliament, and parliament can decide if this particular parliament term, which it used to be like that, do you still want NMPs, right? And if, because we're starting to have talent attraction issues for all political parties, and you want to, then let's be honest about it and discuss it. The other thing I think also it's important to discuss, Jeremy, is that do we actually still think that with what we're seeing in majoritarian democracies around the world where two-party systems are so divisive and so polarized, and then when you have two-party system and using the recent US election, right, to be an independent is impossible. You will be co-opted by one of them because you're seen as diluting, one of the parties, right? Whereas we already have this uniquely Singaporean parliamentary innovation where we actually have an institutionalized. Of course, the NMP scheme has been dragged through the mud with this written thing because it has completely eroded the public trust in the scheme. Right? I think it's very unfair because future NMPs coming on would all now be seen through the lens of, are you going to still say?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is very, very sad because, it's not also going to be fair to those who would step forward, especially if they truly want to be non-partisan and they don't want to be, affiliated with any sort of party line because they don't agree with all of the party lines, right? I mean, either party line or party ideologies. But more importantly, I think just looking at parliamentary systems around the world, if we continue to be first proposed and we continue to be majoritarian system, and we now see what's going on with two-party system, which we seem to also be heading towards that, then do we really want to give up an institutionalized independent bloc we have that could create that three-legged system of parliament that could continue to keep things in check, that they don't become this two-party system that just like getting at each other and nothing gets done. Whereas there's a institutionalized bloc that can continue to check on this partisan ills of two-party system. I don't know. I think this is a conversation that clearly Singaporeans we need to have as a society.
I think it's interesting because, we're talking about different stakeholders, right? Because obviously from a party perspective, this is a group of people who have been trained in parliament, they've gotten through orientation, they know how to do speeches, everybody knows their character now and their speaking record. So they're almost like a pre-vetted, soft-trained group of candidates, like interns. They're like, hey, maybe you should get a returning offer, to give them the chance to become a member of parliament, which is all you have to do is add on the grassroots work of representing the citizens.
Absolutely.
So
it's not something that we can just say, okay, don't do that. I'm not saying that it's a cooling off period, like I said, and you're right. I mean, they clearly have gone through the system. They have the experience. I mean, the NMPs have been chosen. You would see that most of them, because in the NMP scheme, it says this would-be members, distinguished members of society, right? So I would say most would be quite senior in whatever they're doing, and all that. So they can bring quite a lot of experience, maybe even resources, after they step down as MPs. Have a cooling off period. That's why I said have a discussion about what is the right thing to do by the scheme and by the NMPs themselves, right? This time round, it was just, it clearly also rattled a lot of us former NMPs, like, why can't just go for the next cycle?
Yeah.
Right? Let them finish the term, go for the next cycle. But it actually, to my mind, also called up maybe other questions that need to be asked, because both of them are minority candidates, right? So obviously then it also calls to a larger question of, do we need to also review our GRC system? Is it because that we need, minority candidates, and, that there is a talent attraction issue with minority candidates to make up for the GRC requirements? Is GRC system still relevant?
Right.
We need to reduce the number substantially, so that we don't run into this problem that it's almost as if you are actually sacrificing one public institution to sustain another. It's also a question we need to ask, which is also in the article that literally just came out before I came to your place for this podcast, that I've actually penned in Rise Media.
Yeah. What's the title of the Rise Media article?
I don't know what they finally end up with in terms of the headline, because the editor would actually do the but I can't remember, but it's definitely out in Rise Media. It's a commentary that I penned for us to ask these questions about not even also of the GRC system, but also what is the parliament that we need for Singapore in the world that we are obviously heading into, right? The future is no longer what it has been in the last 60 years. And therefore, the parliamentary system that has served us well, do we not need to review? Do we need not to have discussion? We are very good with coming up with something that's uniquely Singapore, just like the NMP scheme, just like the NCMP, just like the GRC. Do we need to look at majoritarian democracy, the first past, seeing what's going on in the mature democracies around the world? Do we need to bring in some element of proportional representation? Because I saw that even with opposition parties in a majoritarian democracy, they will still stay in majority interests and dominant narratives. And when I was in Parliament, none of the opposition members raised migrant worker issues because it won't get them votes. It might even alienate them, actually. It might actually have a political cost for them, because the citizens will know, why are you talking about issues for migrant workers when you are supposed to represent only citizens?
Right.
And if you are, a political party, you are electoral candidate, you need to get votes.
Right, makes sense.
Yeah, so that's merit for us to think about what is the parliamentary system that will best serve us for the next 60 years.
I want to kind of ask also a quick question. Is your term as NMP was also during the pandemic as well.
Yes.
I think that was a crazy time.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious, what was your experience like? That's one. But two, also I have to ask, because that was also the first and only time I think the reserves have ever been unlocked. Was it?
No, we didn't tap into it, but we asked for permission in the Asian financial crisis. I don't think we did in global financial crisis, but I think we definitely did in the Asian financial crisis.
Sure. So yeah, so I want to hear what was the experience in pandemic time.
Yeah, it was actually really quite an experience. I think some parts were quite harrowing. And I would never forget how, because it was locked down, Parliament was still going on. When I went to Parliament, the roads were completely empty.
Oh boy.
Right? This is the road of Northbridge Road and turning into Parliament. And now talking about it, it's not that long ago, but it seemed like a whole lifetime ago. The sense of dread was palpable. Right? Of course, that was the first time we had 4 budgets debated, 4 budgets sessions and sittings in Parliament in the space of just 2 months.
Right.
If I remember the number correctly, I think it was a total of $100 billion, which is why we need to tap into the reserves, and the President's approval was needed. Having said that, I'm glad to say that, as we know from recent news, the government has actually recorded surpluses over the last year. Right? So, and I take the reserves as we said we needed in the 4 budgets that we debated for.
Right.
The last I heard was that we only went as far as 10% of it, but then again, we did well enough to not have to. And plus, like I said, we have all these surpluses. So I'm assuming that surpluses will go back to the reserves that we took out. We didn't take out the whole 100, but I thought it was either 20 or 40% that we still had to into. Yeah, just a lot of fast moving. I thought it was amazing of coming together. I certainly saw a lot of solidarity even between the opposition party and the incumbent. Not to say there were still other things that were challenging that were being put forth, but I think there was a sense of coming together. There was clearly quite a bit of innovation. I remember we were also talking about the chief technology officer as a shared service to just very quickly get the SMEs to ramp up their digitalization effort because everything was going online. It's really to say that in times of crisis, you can bring a lot of ideas to the fore, creativity, but it also speaks of the people in terms of the solidarity, the coming together.
Right.
So we definitely had that. It's not to say that there were no debates and all that, but I think that experience shows that we can come together. We don't have to be petty. When we think about the greater good of the people and the country, I have a lot of hope and trust that we will come together, even when we have opposing ideologies. I've seen that because I've been on parliamentary exchange with other parliaments and there were opposition members. The one that I've been to, I was with Pritam and I thought it was really wonderful. Pritam said that when he goes on these trips, and I'm assuming it's the same for the other opposition members of parliament, he is Team Singapore. Right? He's part of Team Singapore. And it's not to show that we are actually fractured, as a team, as a parliament, not at all. Right? You just add value in a different way, but it is actually still for the good of Singapore. And when he said that in the exchange, I knew that I hope we continue to have such opposition parties and members of parliament, which I want to believe we do. And if we don't, then citizens, we must be smart enough not to vote them in. But if they are this type of opposition members of parliament, we should give them a chance. Because diversity in parliament, as with any other place, is always going to be good for creativity, for inclusion, for equity. And ultimately, it's going to be better for Singapore.
Right. And speaking about adding value in different ways, you yourself have had a career after NMP phase as well. So could you share a little bit more about what you're doing since then?
Yeah. Well, actually, not really that. I just go back to what I was doing before I became an NMP because I quit the corporate sector and I still haven't gone back there. And I have no intention of going back there despite some headhunters asking me to go back to being a CEO. Because never. But I'm certainly open to contributing on commercial boards and all that. But essentially, I've just gone back to what I was doing. I mean, I have to say the 2 years really was a full-time job. And Singapore is also unique where we have part-time MPs doing really full-time job. And I didn't even have to walk the ground, right? In the sense that I don't have constituency duties and not the town council duties as well. And so I really, if you want to truly participate and speak up at every sitting, it is a full-time job. And so I went back to essentially what I was doing. And before I became an NMP that year, I also initiated a new initiative called WorkWell Leaders, where it started as an informal network, but it's now a IPC. Right, it's a charity. It's actually bringing CEOs together to stop thinking of workplace well-being or the well-being of your people as an HR responsibility. It is not, right? It is actually the responsibility of every leader and especially the CEO. It is an organizational well-being that you need to aspire towards and make that happen. I think enough study, and we've just finished a study with NUS to show that organizational well-being contributes directly to organizational performance. The time today where growth is a struggle, where there's so many macro challenges coming our way, we really cannot think of workplace well-being and employee well-being as secondary, very central to performance. It's very central to why we lead in the first place. We lead because we're leading humans and people. And therefore, their well-being must be first principle. And so that's what we're trying to do at WorkWell Leaders. And so we have about 80 corporate members. We do it as a membership base because the membership fee, which is all of 5,000 a year, is to contribute to the full-time charity team, the secretariat team, and to continue to push this, to my mind, as a leadership movement. Very important today, especially since we're seeing leadership crisis around the world. We want to make sure we keep front and center that as leaders, our responsibility is always our people. And it's through our people that we then are able to drive the organizations or the collective towards the goals that we're here to be. And if you are a CEO of a business, that is your profitability, but that profitability comes because of the way you look after your people, right? And you take care of the people. And same for any other, actually, even for political leaders, you need to have the well-being of your people front and center, right? In fulfilling your role as a member of parliament, as a prime minister, as a minister of the different organizations. And I think to that point is why I think this charity, WorkWell Leaders, is really more than just getting leaders to take care of mental health of the people. I hope it really drives this whole movement of more human-centered.
Yeah. And I understand your team has been doing some research on, the Venn diagram between CEO performance and company and employee wellness. Could you share me some high level?
So we literally just, the study with NUS, as I said, we're calling it Well Leaders Impact Measure. And the idea is to give boards, CEOs, stakeholders, and even policymakers, science-backed data and research on what are the relationships and the interdependencies of behaviors and drivers to organizational culture and processes, and therefore the change needed there, impacting employee well-being to organizational performance. It's a very complex study. It's the first of its kind. Often it's binary study, right? You just look at one factor, how does it affect the other factor? So what we're trying to show here, in fact, the study actually looks at over 200 factors, and then from it found that one of the most predictor is actually leaders' well-being. That means the personal mental health and well-being of leaders. And that has the highest impact. I won't share too much because we are announcing the findings with the Well Leaders Awards on the 24th of April. I think that might come after this episode goes out live. But it shows that leaders' well-being actually contributes to organizational performance over all the other factors that we think would contribute to performance, like management and stuff like that. And then in organizational well-being, again, leaders' well-being actually is more effective in contributing to employee well-being than stress management training, yoga training, or even actually EAP, which is employee assistance programs. So what leaders, our rallying cry is be well to lead well, right? Really wanting to bring the attention back to take care of yourself, before you can take good care of others and lead the organization to success. It's the same sort of notion as put on your oxygen mask first before you put on the oxygen mask for others. And so we really want leaders to start making the change for themselves. I mean, it's going back to the Gandhi's quote, right? Be the change you want to see in others. So if you want to see better well-being in your people, you have to start with yourself because you role model that. And you also change the culture when you do that for yourself.
Right.
Yeah, and then that will help mental health. That will allow your people to know they can step forward to share their challenges. And you and I know this. Psychological safety is so important to get the best creativity, the best ideas from your people. And that's why it directly impacts your performance of the team as well as the organization.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I totally agree with you. If you have a competent leader, you have a competent organization. And if you have a leader, you have a happy organization. And if you have an unhappy or stressed out, burned out leader, then you're going to have a burned out.
Imagine the projection, right? The transference, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
The leader on the team. Yeah.
So I really love what you said. Leaders need to take care of themselves first.
Be well to lead well.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, I'll summarize the 3 big takeaways I got from the conversation. First of all, thanks so much for sharing about your own personal experience of being selected a nominated member of parliament, what the selection criteria was like, what your first day like was, your first speech was like, your first 3 deep breaths for Parliament. A really lovely story about kind of like from an insider, but also from a personal perspective. So thank you so much for that. Secondly, thanks so much for sharing about what you think are the criticisms and the benefits of the NMP scheme as a program in terms of, is it non-partisan, some of the challenges facing today that are being exposed, whether it's supposed to be a talent pool or is it supposed to be a neutral third-party voice for key issues that are not being easily raised by the normal members of parliament.
Yeah, I love that.
And thanks so much for sharing about your own kind of like philosophy, right? And I think
Yeah.
this came up not just in terms of the work, the research, but also I think throughout the entire conversation. I think so. What a wonderful set of conversations. And if folks want to hear a little bit about your own personal story about being a divorcee or having depression, you can check out your earlier episode.
Yes.
Audio only that time.
Yes.
Check out that audio episode.
I also wrote a book, 50 Shades of Love. Was my first book.
Yeah.
It's out of print now, but let us know. Maybe we can actually reprint it. But also, I think I've shared my personal stories as well. And check out the website. I have antheaong.com. Antheaong.com. So that would tell you a little bit more as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and see you next time.
Thank you, Jeremy, for having me. It's so nice to be back. I can't believe it's been half a decade. And so much has changed, but you have not. And this conversation is still as enjoyable. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.